Um, in addition to that, we have a rhetoric from the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Well, we have this convention that New Zealand signed, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Then we also have the United Nations Committee for the Rights of the Child. And this is a little police group that runs around the world looking to see how states, parties, those who've signed the convention, how they are now applying the articles in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, how they are now applying that in their own domestic law codes. And even though the convention itself does not talk about domestic discipline, the convention itself does not talk about spanking or smacking, as it were, but it does talk about violence, injury, and abuse. And it says in Article 19 that these things must be eliminated from children. We would all agree with that. We don't want to see children exposed to violence, injury, or abuse. But what the United Nations Committee has done is they produce documents on a regular occasion, and they've got General Comment number 8, which was produced in June 2006, just last month. And in this document they say we must look at the United Nations Conventions as a living document. It changes and grows and morphs as time goes by. A living document, dangerous sort of a thing. And what they say in there is that the committee has repeatedly made clear in its calling upon states parties to enact or repeal, as a matter of urgency, their legislation in order to prohibit all forms of violence, however light, within the family and in schools, including forms of discipline. Prohibit all forms of violence, however light. Now, to understand what they mean by that, because we would agree, let's get rid of violence. However, the committee elsewhere in this latest document says, the committee emphasizes that the convention requires, now this shows how they see it as a living document. The committee emphasizes that the convention, United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, requires the removal of any provisions in statute or common case law which allow some degree of violence against children, that is, reasonable or moderate chastisement or correction in their homes, families, or in any other setting. They equate violence against children, that is, they say, e.g., reasonable correction. That's straight out of our statute, Section 59. So they equate reasonable correction with violence. And when you combine that with what they say here, that we must prohibit, they are calling upon all states parties to enact or repeal as a matter of urgency legislation in order to prohibit all forms of violence, however light, within the family and within schools. So they want to prohibit all forms of reasonable correction, however light. So even a butterfly wisp across the child, I mean, however light, how light is that? Perhaps the child didn't even recognize it. Well, that's where they're going. That's where the United Nations is going. And because people like Cindy Kiro, our Commissioner for Children, and Sue Bradford are committed to the United Nations understanding of these documents, that's where we're going. You can be sure of it. And once, it may not be their intention right now, but once this repeal has been effected, they'll be beginning to tighten up police regulations as to how they enforce laws. They will want to bring in other laws. Steve Mahari and Lila Hare, a couple of years ago, they used to lead the charge on wanting to repeal Section 59. They backed away a little bit for whatever reason. Lila Hare is no longer in Parliament. But they used to say, oh no, Section 59 won't criminalize smacking. We will need to pass another law which specifically makes smacking a crime. That's certainly what took place in Sweden. They 1 year removed reasonable defense, and some years later they passed a law which made smacking specifically a crime. But smacking will be an assault. We've already had that from the police commissioner. It will already be an assault. So we'll be in trouble right from the word go. There will be many negative effects should Section 59 be repealed. As we've said, parents will be disallowed from using any kind of reasonable force with their children to make them do what they are required to do or to stop them from doing what they should not do. Parents' authority will be reduced to the same level as any stranger on the street. Just imagine if the police were, if their ability to use force to arrest people, to issue fines through the court system, to imprison people, if the police had their ability to use force was removed, they would be reduced to making suggestions. The traffic cop might write a ticket and say, please don't speed again, but because there are no sanctions against you, they can't use force. They can only make suggestions. And after a while, people would realize they could ignore these suggestions because there's no sanctions which could follow. And that's precisely the position parents will be put into. They will no longer have any authority with their children apart from moral authority, which their children could choose to obey or choose to ignore. I've talked to a number of parents who've already experienced the fact that their children have been taught in the schools that you don't have to do what your parents say. They're not allowed to smack you, although, of course, the law hasn't forbidden smacking yet, and we hope it won't happen. But some children have already been taught this in the schools. And so parents have said, my children have got the anti-parent message already from the schools. Well, should this Section 59 ever be repealed, children need to be educated about this, right? And people will understand that that's exactly, some people certainly with agendas will need to understand that that's what we need to do now, bring children up to speed so that they can help police their parents, that they're not allowed to force their will upon their children. And that's what it's all about. It's going to set children against the parents, and that parents will become afraid to discipline their children because they might be exposed to a charge of criminal assault, and it might cause their children to be more aggressive against them. It's not a pretty picture whatsoever. So a couple of other issues. They are being very inconsistent when they single out Section 59 for attention, because Section 59 is bracketed along with Section 60 in the Crimes Act, these two sections together, under their own little title where it says powers of discipline. Section 59 deals with domestic discipline, that is, recognizing that parents have the authority, should have the legal authority, to use reasonable force to correct, train, and discipline their children. Section 60 talks about the masters or officers in command of a ship or the pilot in command of an aircraft. That these people, pilots, masters in ships, along with parents, should have the authority to use justifiable or justified in using force to maintain good order and discipline on board their ship or their aircraft. And in fact, it says everyone acting in good faith is justified in using force in obedience to any order given by the master or pilot in command for the purpose aforesaid, as long as the force used is reasonable in the circumstances. So in other words, the law traditionally recognizes parents, pilots, and ship's captains as people needing the authority to use force, in the case of parents, by way of correction, and in the case of pilots and ship's masters, to maintain good order and discipline, as long as the force used is reasonable in the circumstances. Bradford and co. are removing Section 59, removing the authority from the parents. They're not removing the authority from ship's captains or the crew or anyone acting in good faith, if they believe that because that kind of force can be used against anyone on the aircraft to maintain good order and discipline. So they're being very inconsistent there. What should then the government be doing to reduce violence against children in this country? Well, there's a lot of things they could be doing. In fact, they have said that this Section 59 is a first step in a larger strategy. They haven't suggested what that larger strategy is to be, but they say it's one of many steps that are going to be coming.